board. A few people registered. They're about to come. Being recorded. Thank you, dear. And we're going to share screen. The sharing screen stuff is just not working so well. Let's see. Okay, thumbs up if you can see this document, meditation, Judaism, blah, blah, blah. Okay, thank you very much. Just to announce our schedule for the rest of the 3-week period. Class today, yep. Class next week, yep. Class in 2 weeks, nope. Tisha B'Av, that's misspelled, I see. Let us put that there. And so to make it up, we're going to have class on the following Wednesday, which is the 21st. So there we go. What are we doing tonight? Tonight, we're going to expand our study of Ruach HaKodesh meditation, which is meditation, and learn how it involves work on yourself to develop specific personal characteristics. We'll get into that. We'll also discuss how to understand distractions to improve your meditative practice. Part 5. We're going to take a deep dive into working on yourself as a meditation, personal growth. We are here understanding the Ruach HaKodesh, or what's called Enlightenment, which means transcending the physical through work on yourself. This is the third technique we're exploring. We have unification and blessing power coming up. So stay tuned for that. Rabbi Kaplan talks extensively about enlightenment in the following ways. First of all, he makes mention of the fact that we have a multi-component soul that's comprised of nefesh, ruach, and neshama. And he mentions that to elevate yourself through the levels of the soul, specifically to get to Ruach HaKodesh, or enlightenment, we need to develop personal characteristics, and he actually identifies them. Study, carefulness, diligence, cleanliness, abstention, purity, piety, humility, fear of sin, and holiness. So he is right off the bat, based on his research and understanding, telling us that if you want to become enlightened, you have to become a holy person. We'll call it that, a holy person. A person with certain characteristics, and you have the power to mold yourself into such a person. We then took a deep dive into the construction of the soul based on the research of Ethan Dorshav. And he added the fourth component, which is the Eitzim and Musar, the plant part of us. And he talked about how when we die, there's this reintegration of our soul with the external environment, the external soul, as you will. And part of us goes to the biosphere, and part of us goes to the water sphere, and part of us goes to the wind sphere, and part of us goes to the fire sphere. And he gave a lot of examples from Tanakh about how these 4 spheres are constantly referred to, not just in Tanakh, but in Tehillim and the writings and in the prophets. It's remarkable how often this 4-part soul construct is referred to in the Bible. And it leads us to conclude that we don't have a soul, we're in a soul. Okay. And as he mentions, when we die, and he gave a lot of references, there's this reintegration of us with the larger environment. And which is interesting because we know that there's an integration going on already, even while we're alive. We know that there's biodegradable. We know that That's what happens when we drink water. What happens with our biological systems? We know it goes into the larger environment and so on. What happens when you breathe? There's an exchange of air and oxygen and gases with our larger environment. That finally takes place. There's a culmination when we die. But it led us to question, okay, that happens on the macro level, let's call it, meaning that happens with the soul at large. What about you? What about the person that dies? What's that experience like? And does how you live affect what happens to that person, what happens to you when you die? To use his terminology, how does your neshama, your name, equates neshama with the name, and it's not just your first and last name, it's your you that you've constructed this lifetime. How does that connect with God's neshama or name? Okay, so to talk a bit about that process, we read additional studies by Rabbi Kaplan and asked questions such as, are you your body? Are you your brain? Are you your memories? Where do you go when you die? How do you integrate with God's memory? Somehow there's an integration of the internal you, let's call it, with God in some way. Okay. To further elaborate on what that integration is like and what leads up to that, we studied another part of his essay, Naked Before God, and we asked these questions. What is immortality like? What's the purpose of the brain and nervous system? The mental activity of the disembodied soul, looking at oneself, standing naked before God, no rationalization, burning shame, judgment. Okay. So there he made the point that the brain and nervous system act as a filter in two ways. One is by filtering the overwhelming, exciting, extraordinary universe so that our senses don't get overwhelmed by all this stimulation. It acts as a filter there, but it also acts as an internal filter, meaning that people use their brain and nervous system to filter out thoughts and feelings and experiences and memories that they don't want to pay attention to for whatever reason. Maybe they're too busy, or maybe they are ashamed, or maybe they did something they don't want to think about, things along these lines. So when we're alive, we use this filter to kind of manage our internal world. But the problem is when you die, your filter dies with you. That biological brain and nervous system integrate with the biosphere. But you, that part of you that's left is like, oh, I haven't thought about that. Yeah, I remember I did that. All these experiences and thoughts and so on, you're exposed to. And he started making references to burning shame. And it raised the question, well, I mean, are there degrees of shame? Are there degrees of burning? I mean, if you have mild sins, do you burn less? If you have major sins, do you burn more? Is there a hierarchy of sins? I mean, I think already we're on the track that, yeah, there is a hierarchy. There are evil things. And normally good people don't necessarily do evil things. There are bad people doing really bad things these days, and they've always have been. Okay. So there seems to be some kind of hierarchy. Okay. We then progressed further to another essay of his, What the Dead Think of Us. And we asked the question, do the dead know what is happening in the world of the living? And Rabbi Kaplan referenced the Talmud and the Kabbalah. And he talked about PostBody Awareness. And he mentioned the body as the main source of attention. And that's why we have utmost respect for human remains. He's basically saying that there's a disorientation, that there's an awareness that you have an awareness of the physical world when you are leaving the physical world, and it's overwhelming and you get disoriented. So you focus on your body because you're familiar with your body. And at least that anchors your attention while you get used to the rest of the stuff that you've never seen before. Okay, and he also mentioned However, that could be a downside to that, because those people that are really attached to the body in the physical realm have a hard time letting go after this initial attachment. The initial attachment is necessary so you could get your bearings, but if you're really attached to the body and the physical, you have a very hard time letting go, but you really have to start letting go, because the body as we described earlier, it's integrating. You're not going to have the body to look at after a while. Then what are you going to do? Okay. And that's why he mentioned we have respect for human remains, because there's actually a sensitivity for that you that is persisting past the disintegration of the body. And he's implying that there's some kind of feelings involved. And if you see your body in a bad condition, you feel bad. So he's actually characterizing the you that persists when you're dying as having these kinds of feelings. Okay. Okay. And he mentions that how we prepare for that experience in this world, meaning he's concluding that how you live affects how you die. Okay. He does then talk about Gehennam, hell, the fires of hell. And he says, a number of our great teachers write that the fire of Gehennam is actually the burning shame one experiences because of his sins. And then he says, we find that evil leads to shame. So he is basically saying that shame, real shame, is connected to doing evil things. Okay, and there are other things you can feel ashamed about, but he's basically implying that ordinary stuff that you feel ashamed about is not as bad as doing evil stuff, because when you do evil stuff, you feel really bad shame, so to speak. Okay, so he is positing that there's a hierarchy of bad stuff you could do, and therefore there are degrees of shame you could feel, from severe to mild, let's say. Okay, so then we kind of explored, well, what exactly is evil and what sins are evil? And how does the pursuit of Ruach HaKodesh, help us avoid doing these evil things? Okay, and again, I'm reminding everybody that the steps to leading to Ruach HaKodesh per Rabbi Kaplan, based on his understanding of the Talmud, are to develop these personal characteristics: study, carefulness, diligence, cleanliness, abstention, purity, piety, humility, fear of sin, and holiness. Okay, so to explore Gehennam and the bad stuff that people do, we took a look at Judith Antonelli and her book, In the Image of God. Why? Because she does outstanding research in comparative religion and taking a look at what the Torah professes versus what the pagan cultures were doing at the time the Torah was given. And she has really sound research in anthropology and sociology and psychology and ancient religion and feminist theory. And she's very influenced by the Rambam, and in that she does posit that one of the prime motivations God had in giving us the Torah was to wean us away from those pagan practices. Okay. And the reason why she's a feminist is that she basically concluded that one of the benefits of giving us the Torah is that the plight of women in particular was made much better, because if you see what happened to women in the pagan cultures, and which still takes place, you could see that comparatively in the Torah, we redeem their dignity, the dignity of women. And that was a primary plus. I don't know if I could call it God's motivation, but that was a primary byproduct of giving of the Torah. Okay. So she then talks a lot about Gehenna and Molech worship, where people would sacrifice their children to whatever fake god they were worshiping. And she actually talks about a place called Gehennam, an actual place which is in Israel today. and says that place was known as a huge sacrificial site where people sacrificed many, many children. Okay, so she went on to mention that the sacrifices, interestingly, involved the three major averot that to us are the huge no-nos: the idol worshiper, the forbidden sex, and the bloodletting, because all three of these were involved in these modes of worship, idol worship, that very frequently featured child sacrifice. Okay, so therefore you could see that since the Torah is the counter to that, then we can say that we are avoiding evil by doing what the Torah tells us to do. We are therefore feeling less shame because we're not doing the evil stuff. Therefore, you could probably say that those of us following the Torah have an easier time when we die than those people that are doing all that awful evil stuff, including child sacrifice. I think that is where we are landing, but it's not just a case of, well, just do what the Torah says. You have to develop yourself into a certain type of person in order to avoid these bad things. It's not just going by the book, it's personal development. And that's where we are landing today. Okay. With the Musar movement and how it promotes work on yourself. He's got a chapter in this book, meditation, Jewish meditation, that talks about Musar. Okay, let's take a look at what he says. Chapter, interestingly, is called Remolding the Self. This is what he says. One of the most important meditative movements in Judaism is associated with the Musar school, founded by Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who lived from 1810 to 1883. Musar, self-perfection, was always an important element in Judaism. Important texts on the subject were published as early as the 10th century. The Musar movement, however, made self-perfection its primary focus. The movement taught that a person should continually strive to grow spiritually, ethically, and morally throughout the course of his lifetime. So for me, this was the first time I had heard of the Musar movement referred to as a meditative movement. Rabbi Kaplan explains how. Interestingly, you might go to a shir and hear, about Musar. He gave him Musar type of thing. You talk about rebukes or you talk about reminders about to be ethical, but he's characterizing this as a meditative movement, using meditation to get to that point. It continues, interpersonal relationships were given a high priority in the Musar movement. It was not enough to be able to experience the divine. One also had to be able to get along with others in the best possible manner. Anger, hatred, revenge, gossip, and jealousy were seen as bad habits that could stunt a person's spiritual growth. The premise was that if we grow in our relationship to God, we should also grow in our ability to relate in a positive way to our fellow human beings. The Musar school thus strove to make every individual into a saint in every sense of the word. People were taught to be sensitive to their own shortcomings and were encouraged to create personal programs to rectify them one by one. So the Musar movement involved getting on a program to get your black sash or your green sash or your yellow sash. To some extent, the Musar movement was a reaction to the Hasidic movement. Hasidism began as a mystical movement. In order to climb high spiritual mountains, experienced guides or rebbes were needed. In some Hasidic circles, however, the guide became more important than the mountain. Many Hasidim regarded the Rebbe as the paradigm of the saintly man and lived the righteous life vicariously through him. Now, he's criticizing only those people who relinquish their personal responsibility for themselves and said, all right, well, my Rebbe's a saint, that makes me a saint. Okay. I think we would understand that it doesn't work like that. And Rabbi Kaplan, by the way, had a close relationship with the Rebbe and was very entrenched with the Hasidic community. So this is not a rap on Hasidism. The Musar movement developed among the Mitnagadim, opponents of the Hasidic movement. Musar schools taught that it was not enough to live the righteous life through a master. Every individual had an obligation to strive to live the righteous life in his own right. Beyond that, the Musar movement offered a program through which every person could gradually perfect himself. There is an extensive Musar literature in Hebrew. Some of the most important Musar works, such as Path of the Upright, Masilat Yesharim by Moses Chaim Luzzatto, the Ramchal, and Ways of the Righteous, or Chot Tzadikim, again, the Ramchal, have been translated into English. Very powerful. I've seen the Path of the Masilat Yesharim. The first part of the Musar program was to make a daily habit of reading a lesson from a classical Musar work. After reading the lesson, one was to spend a short period of time contemplating it and relating it to one's life. So this is how he's showing how Musar learning involved what? Meditation. How? Contemplation. Contemplation being a form of meditation. As the individual began to advance, this contemplation became a meditation. One would read a lesson from a classical Musar text on how to improve the ethical, moral, or religious quality of one's life, then meditate on this lesson for 20 to 30 minutes. This is a simple type of meditation similar to the one described in chapter 3, which we're going to review at another point, where I discuss meditating and how to rearrange your life. Exactly right. I'll make a little note here. It is a meditation in which one considers a particular aspect of one's life and thinks about it and thinks about ways to improve it. In meditations such as these, extraneous thoughts are gently pushed out of the mind. Some authorities, such as the Baal Shem Tov, however, maintained that a person should pay attention to extraneous thoughts since they could provide clues as to what direction to take. One may wish to make mental notes of these extraneous thoughts and then analyze them to see how to make use of them to help attain one's goals. So this is really interesting from a meditation point of view. Why? Because he's saying that you study text, which encourages you to behave ethically or morally in a certain area, and you contemplate it. But there's two directions you can take for the contemplation. One is kind of what we've been doing in our Vipassana meditation, which is basically to quiet the mind, to have a focal point. In this case, you're focusing on what you're learning, the text, but you're trying to remove extraneous thoughts, as we do when we try to focus on the focal point only and not get distracted, so that you can really get a sense, the tom, the taste, the essence of what the text that you're learning. But he says there's another way of using this meditation, this contemplation meditation, which he says the Baal Shem Tov encourages us to do, which is, no, you don't try to avoid distraction by the extraneous thoughts. You take a look at them and see what they might be teaching you. Okay. The program of self-improvement could include more than just moral issues. The Musar school saw their method as a way of becoming a more effective human being. Problems such as shyness, indecision, lack of motivation, and the like could also be helped through Musar methods. So today, we have time management workshops, and we have assertiveness workshops, and we have communication skill workshops, and we have $1 billion industry of human resource development. We have human resource departments, and we have people making tons of money running classes. We got it right here. The Musar people were doing that stuff, and it's not just a question of increased sensitivity. It's a question of knowing how to become more of a overcoming shyness, perhaps, or learning how to set priorities and make decisions. That's Musar, and that requires meditative work. The second part of the Musar program consists of a mantra-like repetition of the concept one is working on. For example, a person may have a tendency to gossip and want to break this habit. He may realize that gossip is harmful to others and morally wrong, and that it is forbidden by the Torah commandment, do not go as a talebearer among your people. That's from Vayikra. The method of breaking the gossip habit would be to take the biblical verse, do not go as a talebearer among your people, and repeat it every day for a 20 to 30-minute period like a mantra. As one works on it, the message is gradually absorbed and the self-control necessary to avoid gossip is attained. That is self-programming. And we're going to go over this in depth, and we'll show how the gurus for personal growth and self-development are using this exact technique to program your internal operating system to believe a certain way and therefore affect your behavior a certain way. So he's talking about programming yourself to break a bad habit through meditation. Meditation being this repetition of whatever message you want to really build in you and understand in your subconscious. Another effective technique is described by Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. This technique consists in speaking to various parts of the body. If a person wishes to change a certain trait, he can talk to the part of the body associated with that trait, and in this way change his actions. Rabbi Nachman has a book, Anatomy of the Soul. It's a big book. It's like this. And he talks about how different parts of the body are connected to different emotions and cognitive processes. So I forget if it was the pancreas that was related to anger type of thing. Let's say it's the pancreas, but I'm not sure. But let's say it is. So what he's actually talking about, he's like saying, you're talking to yourself and saying, okay, pancreas, I want you to stop injecting anger into my system, this type of thing. Self-talk. This self-talk is a very popular way of programming yourself. It's a foundation of personal development in the personal development world. It is itself a meditation, sending messages to yourself. And that's what he's talking about here. In particular, Rabbi Nachman talking about self-talk and based on the perspective that parts of your body are responsible for certain feelings and cognitive patterns, and having and conversing with that part of the body to get a better result. Part of Musar activity. And he gives examples. Let us say that you want to lose weight. You can use Musar and other meditative techniques in various ways. You can simply use the phrase, I am going to lose weight, as a mantra. You can speak to your body and tell it that you want it to be slim. You can also use an imaging technique. Imagine yourself slim, what you would look like, and how it would feel to be carrying less weight. Gradually, your self-image will start to change. You can speak to your mouth, telling it to not eat so much, and to your stomach, telling it to crave less food. A combination of techniques can be effective even in overcoming lifelong habits. Now, how does this, so what he's basically saying here is you're programming yourself to be a different person that doesn't always reach for the second, third, or fourth dessert. So basically what he's basically saying is that if you put in this effort and you say, I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to be slim, and this and that, the other thing. So then and you put in the time to do that, and the next time you reach for that third slice of pie, part of you says, wait a minute, that's not me. That's not me. I'm not the guy that does that. And it's much easier to pull your hand away. That's what he's saying. Through a meditation of self-programming. There are several hints that the Musar schools give to make any self-improvement program more effective. The first is not to try to make too many changes at once. They're getting nice and practical here. They know what they're doing. A Talmudic teaching, if one tries to grasp too much, one grasps nothing, is taken as a watchword. Better to be successful in making small changes than to fail at making big ones. If one succeeds in making a small change in one's life, it is easy to build on this success. Success breeds success. Failures breeds failure. This is universal. It's big in martial arts. Let me tell you. Start small, get a small victory under your belt. Nobody should go for the black sash right off the bat. The important message is that success breeds success and failure breeds failure. Okay. People often try to effect a change in their lifestyle and make the attempt many times, only to meet with failure. This is particularly true of people who have tried to lose weight or give up smoking. Take as an example the person who resolves to quit smoking. He keeps his resolution for a few weeks, but then feels that he cannot go for the rest of his life without a cigarette and reverts back to his bad habit. He has experienced a failure, which makes stopping all the more difficult the next time around. After a number of failures, people give up and feel that the habit in question is beyond their control. The Musar approach would be to give up smoking for a specified period of time, let's say 30 days. At the end of the 30-day period, one could begin smoking again. This is the key to success. During this 30-day period, a person will not have to confront the fact that he will never taste a cigarette again, or that he will have to maintain this level of self-control for years to come. The time of abstinence is manageable because it has a limit. The point of this technique is that at the end of the 30-day period, a person is free to choose whether or not to begin smoking. If he resumes smoking, he does not have to feel like a failure. Quite to the contrary, he has been successful in maintaining his 30-day abstinence and therefore has a success upon which to build. Later, he can stop for another 30-day period. After doing this a number of times, he may find that the desire to smoke has waned. Why? Because his self-esteem is high. We would call this building self-esteem. He's got a victory so that after 30 days, he can say, all right, well, look, I won this. I can start smoking again, but I'm the guy that could. He showed himself that he could do it because he hasn't like put this lifetime, it's now or never. If I don't drop it now, if I stop smoking now, I should never smoke again. That could be overwhelming. But now he's got a 30-day victory and he can say, all right, fine, I'll smoke. I'm still the guy that can stop though. Maybe he smokes for a week. I want to go back to being the guy that stopped. And he gets another victory. So now he builds an image in himself that says, I'm the guy that can do this because he's proven to himself that he can do it, as opposed to like, all right, well, I failed at stopping for the rest of my life, so I'm never going to do it again. This is really smart. Of course, okay. This is, and by the way, this is particularly true if during the period of abstinence, one uses the Musar meditational techniques discussed earlier. One can use the expression, I want to stop smoking, as a mantra to help strengthen one's will, so that by the end of the 30-day period, the desire to smoke will be diminished. So not only are you just using the willpower to not pick up a cigarette, but you're programming yourself to be a non-smoker. Other meditational techniques can also be helpful. The idea of using 30-day periods is a very powerful tool in spiritual growth. Many moral or ethical habits are easier to break than smoking or eating habits, since in the latter one must deal with the body as well as the mind. Many bad moral or ethical habits can be overcome in a 30-day period. And by the way, before it wraps up, I'm just going to point out that what is one of those mido personality characteristics that have to be developed to attain enlightenment and Ruach HaKodesh? Abstention. Here we have a manual for learning how to develop the skill of abstention. By stopping smoking. Okay. You can work on a relatively large number of character traits over the course of years and thus continually grow, both spiritually and morally. You can, in fact, remold yourself into the good and righteous person you wish to be. Where you are is not as important as where you are heading. If you are willing to devote your life to continued growth, there are virtually no limits to the levels you can reach. Musar, then, is a way of becoming the good person that you got to be, developing these traits so that you can advance through Ruach HaKodesh and become enlightened. And I will bet you that the Musarim have ways of doing all this stuff, and we can come up with our own. But that's what we're talking about here. Okay. Let's finish up with Bhante. Hold on. We got Bhante and a little bit on distractions. Understanding distractions. In this case, he's going to talk about the distraction of desire. This is what he says. Let us suppose you have been distracted by some nice experience in meditation. It could be a pleasant fantasy or a thought of pride. It might be a feeling of self-esteem. It might be a thought of love, or even the physical sensation of bliss that comes with the meditation experience itself. Whatever it is, what follows is the state of desire. Desire to obtain whatever you have been thinking about, or desire to prolong the experience you are having. I think we've talked about this. No matter what its nature, you should handle desire in the following manner. You know what he's going to say. Notice a thought or sensation as it arises. Notice the mental state of desire that accompanies it as a separate thing. Notice the exact extent or degree of that desire. Then notice how long it lasts and when it finally disappears. When you have done that, return your attention to breathing. Apply mindfulness to the desire. It's like, I feel really good now. I feel like I'm having peace of mind. I feel like I'm experiencing nirvana. You keep desiring that. So you become mindful. Oh, there I am desiring to prolong this feeling I have. Oh, okay, back to the breath. So he's always going to tell us to apply mindfulness to whatever it is that's distracting us. And here's just giving many examples. There's a million ways that we get distracted, and mindfulness is the way to address them all. Okay, on that note, we will meditate. We'll turn off the